On the highway, a chain reaction crash happened out of nowhere. I was left with a fractured skull, barely hanging on. When my husband, who's a well-known respiratory specialist, showed up, he didn't even look at me. He rushed past, straight to his first love. She had nothing more than a scrape on her arm. I tried to call out for help, but he just turned and looked at me like I was being dramatic. "You're fine. Don't act like you're so fragile," he snapped, brushing me off like my pain didn't matter. At the hospital, things only got worse. He used his position to get every bit of attention, monopolizing the medical staff, and as my supposed sole family member, he signed the papers to abandon my treatment. "It's just a fractured skull," he said, sounding totally calm. "Save the woman in my arms first. She's a renowned painter. She's more important." As I started to lose consciousness, his muttered words cut through the fog. "You're better off dead. We don't want anyone knowing about Leona's drunk driving, Dr. Becker. This patient has a cranial fracture and is in critical condition. She needs immediate emergency treatment." Several nurses hurried over, trying to lift me onto a stretcher, but they were stopped cold by my husband, Matthew Becker. The pileup had left victims scattered across the highway like fallen leaves in a storm. The entire expressway was shut down, and even with 3 ambulances on site, there weren't enough to evacuate all the injured. Matthew walked over, his expression unreadable. He lifted my eyelids for a cursory glance before pulling out a tissue to wipe away the blood that had sullied his hands, his distaste plain as day. "She's beyond saving," he declared flatly. "No one could pull her back from this. Stop wasting time, let it go." I wanted to scream, to plead, to beg him not to give up on me, but my voice was trapped somewhere deep inside me, unreachable. The only movement I could muster was the faint twitch of my fingers. Desperate to grab hold of him. Surely, I thought, he'd soften at the sight of me, and allow the ambulance to take me for treatment. But instead, he pushed my hand aside, cold and deliberate. The chill in my heart was worse than the pain racking my body. I understood then, Matthew wasn't acting out of panic or ignorance. He meant every word, every action. But why? I had come to pick him up from the hospital today. He'd texted me in the morning, urging me to come quickly. He said he was exhausted after attending back-to-back seminars for 3 days straight and needed me to drive him home. On the way there, I got caught up in this accident. And now, I was lying crushed under a truck tire on the highway after a chain reaction collision. When I first regained consciousness, barely clinging to life, I used what little strength I had left to call him for help. He arrived soon enough, but not for me. He ran past me, shouting his first love's name. "Leona," he called, his voice filled with an urgency I had never heard from him before. Even when his eyes landed on me sprawled on the asphalt, he pretended not to see, his foot stepping cruelly onto my already broken body as he hurried past. That single, brutal act sent me spiraling into agony, my skull fractured, my pain indescribable. When rescuers finally pulled me out and prepared to rush me to the hospital, Matthew stepped in again. "Dr. Becker, we can't just abandon her. She's still alive," one of the nurses protested. Matthew let out a sharp, disdainful laugh. "There are other victims who need care more than she does. Why waste resources on her? And besides," he added, his tone cutting, "I'm the attending physician. Who's in charge here, you or me?" The nurse faltered under his glare, retreating into silence. Matthew didn't stop there. "Prepare a do not resuscitate consent form," he ordered. "I'm her husband, and I'll sign it." The words hit me like a thunderclap, each syllable carving out the last remnants of hope in my chest. Matthew was a renowned respiratory specialist, a man who held sway over life and death in the hospital halls. If he insisted on blocking my treatment, there was no one who could defy him. "I don't want to die. Please, someone save me," I rasped. "Please." But when Matthew left, the nurses followed. I reached out blindly, grabbing onto the sleeve of one nurse who hesitated at the doorway. My fingers clung desperately as I looked up at her with pleading eyes. Her face betrayed a flicker of pity, but it was fleeting. She gently pried my hand away. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I can't risk losing my job," and then she was gone, leaving me alone with my despair. "Blame the heavens," she said softly, her back already turned. "Some people are just born unlucky." I lay there on the ground, my body trembling as the chill seeped into my bones. The cacophony of voices around me was a cruel reminder of how close help was, yet not a single soul stepped forward. The ambulance stood within reach, and I could feel the cruel irony of life slipping away, inch by inch. My chest burned with bitterness. "Matthew, why? Why are you so determined to see me dead? I could be saved, I should be saved. Why is no one helping this patient?" A voice broke through the noise. A doctor in a white coat had spotted me. "That's Dr. Becker's wife," someone replied hesitantly. "He signed a DNR agreement, said she wasn't worth the resources." "Nonsense," the doctor barked. "Who gave him the right to decide her life and death? Get her on that ambulance, now." Hope flickered faintly within me, like a guttering flame. Perhaps there was still a chance. "Matthew," the sound of my movement must have reached someone, for they rushed to notify him. Moments later, he appeared, leaning down to check my breath with an impassive hand. "Still alive? Well, isn't that something?" he muttered, as if it was an inconvenience. The doctor who'd spoken up earlier planted himself firmly between us. His face was tight with fury. "What's wrong with you?" he snapped. "Rose is your wife, not your property. You don't have the authority to deny her treatment." Matthew clicked his tongue, his annoyance plain. She's my wife, which means I know her condition better than anyone. She's tough, she'll pull through. I was just joking earlier. What's got you so riled up? Matthew produced some equipment and began examining me, his hands rough and impatient. The brain's nearly spilling out, he said dismissively. Alan, there's no point in trying. I've already signed the DNR, no one will come after you for following my orders. This was it, my last chance. Summoning every ounce of strength left in me, I forced the words out, each syllable a desperate plea. I want to live. Don't give up on me. The doctor, Alan Henry, hesitated, visibly moved. Then, without a word, he shoved Matthew aside and had me rushed into the ambulance. As the doors closed behind me, he threw a sharp warning over his shoulder. You'll pay for this, Matthew. Expect to be disciplined. Matthew didn't flinch. He simply turned on his heel, his indifference chilling. Before leaving, he took the anesthetists with him, ensuring not a single vial of anesthesia was left behind. Let's see how you save her now, he sneered. I drifted into unconsciousness, the pain slicing through me like a blade. Without anesthesia, I could feel every agonizing touch as the doctor worked. A nurse beside me whispered, her voice thick with pity. What's wrong with Dr. Becker? He acts like he hates his wife with a vengeance. Her words floated faintly to my ears, and I answered silently in my heart, isn't it obvious? I'm just an obstacle between him and his precious Leona. Matthew and I had grown up together, childhood sweethearts destined to marry. But after our wedding, the warmth between us vanished. He fell for Leona at first sight. Even while we were still newlyweds, he regretted marrying me. Drunken nights revealed his true thoughts, her name tumbling from his lips like a confession. The patient's condition is critical, brain hemorrhaging and severe shock. We need a specialist. Dr. Becker is the most experienced in this field, someone said. They must have called Matthew again, because his voice soon rang through the line, sharp and clear. What now? Did she wake up? If she's conscious, ask if she left any candy in the car. Leona wants something sweet. Alan's disbelief was palpable. Your wife's barely clinging to life, and you're worrying about candy? Matthew scoffed, utterly unfazed. I told you she wasn't going to make it. You're the ones who insisted on trying, and with that, he hung up. Those words were the last thing I heard before darkness consumed me.